I planned to announce my pregnancy. Instead, my boyfriend dumped me with a note. At my birthday celebration, where I had intended to share the news of my pregnancy, my boyfriend handed me a carefully wrapped gift. Inside was a note. It read, "I'm leaving you. You're worthless. I deserve someone better." Laughter erupted around the room as he walked out. Some of our friends looked at me, uncertain, waiting for my reaction. But I just smiled, because he had no idea what I was capable of. Justin and I had been together for just over 3 years. He had this charisma to him. Attentive, charming, the kind of guy who actually maintained eye contact during a conversation, instead of constantly scanning the room for someone more exciting. Things escalated pretty quickly between us, and by the time we hit our 1-year anniversary, we were living together in a small but cozy apartment that stretched our budget to its limits. The timing wasn't great financially, but in a city like this, rent is always outrageous, so we went for it. Our relationship wasn't flawless, but it felt secure. We had a shared vision, someday owning a home, traveling, maybe starting a family. Justin always cared a bit too much about appearances. He was obsessed with the car we drove, which restaurants we were seen in, and of course getting the perfect Instagram-worthy shot of every moment. Looking back, that probably should have been a red flag, but hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. Around 4 months ago, I began feeling off. Nausea in the mornings, constant exhaustion. I took a pregnancy test just to eliminate the possibility. Though we had been cautious, we weren't exactly meticulous. 2 pink lines. I can still picture myself sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at that tiny plastic stick like it was ancient script I couldn't decipher. I took about a week to process it before telling anyone. My best friend Barbara was the first to know. She brought wine to our usual girls' night, and when I opted for water, she figured it out immediately. She asked thoughtful questions, what I wanted, how I thought Justin would react, practical things like health insurance and maternity leave. She helped me organize the chaos in my head. As for Justin, I decided to wait. My birthday was just a few weeks away, and we were planning a low-key gathering at our place with our closest friends. I figured it would be the perfect time to share the news surrounded by love. Again, hindsight is cruel. The weeks leading up to my birthday felt strange. The so-called morning sickness, honestly, it lasted all day, was making it hard to function, and I was doing my best to hide it. Justin didn't notice. I chalked it up to him being busy. He'd been staying out later, glued to his phone more often, just a little detached. I assumed it was work stress. My birthday fell on a Saturday. I spent the morning decorating the apartment, while Justin left to grab the cake, which somehow took him nearly 3 hours. Whatever. By 6 p.m., friends began to trickle in. Barbara and her husband, our friends Aaron and Sergio, my cousin Lana, who was in town visiting, and others, including Maria, who I'd known since college. Everything seemed to be going well. The food was good, drinks were flowing, and I had a sparkling water disguised as a vodka soda to avoid suspicion. The room buzzed with laughter and music. I had planned to make my big announcement after the cake, and across the room, Barbara kept giving me these little reassuring nods that made my stomach flutter with nervous excitement. Then around 9 p.m., Justin clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. My heart nearly stopped. Had he figured it out? Was he going to beat me to the punch with some grand announcement? He began a speech about how special I was, how lucky he felt to have me. He looked me straight in the eye the entire time. Then he handed me a beautifully wrapped box, tied with a silk ribbon. The room went still. A few guests raised their phones to record the moment. For a brief second, I wondered if it was an engagement ring, and felt a flicker of panic. Should I still announce the pregnancy if he proposed? But when I opened the box, there was no ring. Just a neatly folded piece of paper. I opened it, confused. The words inside are etched into my memory forever. I'm leaving you. You're useless. I deserve better. Your things will be packed by Monday. I looked up, sure it had to be some horrible prank, but his expression had shifted completely. Cold, aloof, even amused. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he said we were over. That it had been fun, but he'd outgrown me. Then he laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, hearty laugh. A few people around us chuckled too, probably thinking it was all an elaborate joke. But then Justin turned and walked out the front door without another word. Silence followed. I stood there frozen, with the note still in my hand. The announcement I had prepared died in my throat. Everyone looked between me and the now closed door, waiting for someone to say just kidding. But no one did. Barbara crossed the room and took the paper from me. She read it, muttered that he was a complete piece of garbage, and then everyone began to react at once. Concern, outrage, disbelief. And me? I just smiled. Not because I wasn't heartbroken. I was. Not because I wasn't utterly humiliated. I absolutely was. But in that moment, I had a realization. Justin didn't know what was coming. He thought he'd pulled off the perfect exit, a grand public finale to our relationship, where he could walk away as the one in control. But he didn't know I was pregnant. He didn't know I'd found his hidden credit card statements 2 weeks earlier, while looking for a stamp in his desk. He didn't know I had seen the texts on his Apple Watch when he left it unattended in the shower. Pro tip: use two-factor authentication. And most importantly, he didn't realize I'm not the kind of woman who collapses under pressure. I'm the kind who recalibrates and makes a plan. So I smiled. I thanked everyone for coming. I told them I was okay, I wasn't, and that they didn't need to worry, they did. I even cut the birthday cake Barbara had brought and passed out slices like I was celebrating a new chapter, not mourning the end of one. Maria left soon after, claiming she wasn't feeling well. Curious timing, right? Don't worry, we'll get to that. The rest stayed, helping clean up, offering places to stay, jokingly, but not entirely offering alibis. By midnight, everyone had trickled out, except Barbara. She refused to leave, insisting she'd crash on the couch. Once we were alone, I finally unraveled. The pregnancy, the betrayal, the utter shame of it all, it came rushing in like a tidal wave. Barbara didn't try to fix it with meaningless comfort phrases. She just held me while I sobbed, letting me fall apart without trying to patch it up. When I calmed down around 2 a.m., I told her I was pregnant. She wasn't shocked. She said she'd suspected, based on how I'd been acting. I then showed her the credit card statements, hotel bookings, dinners, jewelry, none of which had ever made their way to me. I showed her the screenshots of texts to someone named Mem, with heart emojis, and plans for meetups when I was supposedly working late. We both knew exactly who M was, especially after Maria's early exit from the party. We stayed up talking through the night. Options. Strategies. Barbara asked whether I planned to tell Justin about the baby. I told her I would, when I was ready. Not before. As for the affair and the lies, I wasn't interested in some petty revenge fantasy, but I was absolutely going to make sure the truth saw the light of day. Barbara looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration. She said I looked scary in the best possible way, when I had that determined gleam in my eye. I laughed. A real laugh. For the first time since opening that box. That night, lying in bed alone for the first time in years, one hand on my still flat stomach, I made 2 promises. One to my unborn child, that I would build a safe, stable and loving home. And one to myself, that I would rise from this. Stronger, wiser, unshakable. Justin thought he was writing the final chapter of our story, but he had no idea I was already drafting a brand new beginning. The following morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes and freshly brewed coffee. Barbara was still there. God bless her. Acting as though it was any other Sunday morning, but checking on me every few minutes with that worried friend expression she couldn't quite hide. She kept gently urging me to eat, clearly more concerned about the baby than I was able to show just yet. I managed a few bites before the nausea kicked in. Morning sickness is a cruel misnomer, by the way. It doesn't check the clock. Justin didn't come home that day. Part of me was relieved. The other part, still raw and bleeding, found the silence unbearable. I oscillated between numbness, rage, and this surreal sense of detachment. My brain shifted into autopilot, focusing on logistics to avoid facing the wreckage of my emotions. I made lists of what needed to be handled financially, doctor appointments to make, people to inform, survival mode, basically. Barbara helped me start packing up Justin's stuff. Not everything, just enough to send the message that I had no intention of welcoming him back. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed non-stop with messages from friends. Most were kind and concerned, checking in, asking if I was okay. A few, less helpfully, were clearly fishing for drama. The silence from one particular person, deafening. Maria, remember her? The one who fled the party early, claiming she felt sick? Yeah. Monday came, and reality hit hard. I called in sick to work, which I almost never do. I scheduled a doctor's appointment to confirm the pregnancy, and start planning what came next. Around noon, while researching tenant rights, because Justin and I were both on the lease, I got a text from him. "I'll be by at 7 to get my things. Make sure you're not there." The audacity. I stared at that message for a solid 5 minutes before responding with a single word. No. No explanation. No alternative arrangement. Just a hard boundary. He called immediately. I declined. Then I called Barbara, who wasted no time rallying the troops. By 6:30, my apartment was full of support. Aaron, Sergio, Lana, who had extended her visit, and a few others. A protective wall of people who had my back. Justin showed up at exactly 7 o'clock. His face when he walked in and saw everyone waiting for him. Priceless. He tried to act tough, demanding to know what was going on. But Aaron, built like a linebacker, calmly handed him a suitcase with a few essentials. He told Justin that the rest of his stuff would be available later, once he arranged a civilized time, and acted like a decent human being. Justin's eyes darted toward me. I was sitting on the couch, perfectly calm on the outside, even if my heart was thumping like mad. He started to argue, saying this was all ridiculous, that I should just let him get his things. I spoke, finally, my voice cool and steady. I told him he should be grateful I hadn't changed the locks yet, and that we could discuss the rest of his things after I'd had some time to recover from the wonderful birthday surprise he'd orchestrated. He tried to protest again, but something in my tone must have warned him not to push it. He took the suitcase and headed for the door, but not before muttering that I always needed an audience. Rich coming from the guy who dumped me in front of our entire friend group. After he left, I broke down, not for him, for what I thought we had, for the dreams we'd shared, for the life I now had to reimagine from scratch, for the tiny life growing inside me, who deserved a better start than this. The next morning, I called a locksmith, and had the locks changed. As for Maria, I had strong suspicions. Her sudden exit from the party had set off alarm bells, but I needed proof. That proof came sooner than I expected, from an unlikely source, Sergio. He messaged me on Tuesday evening to say he and Aaron had seen Justin and Maria together a couple of months ago. At the time, they hadn't thought much of it, figured it could have been innocent. Now with the context, he realized it probably wasn't. He apologized for not speaking up sooner. It felt like a punch to the stomach, and at the same time, it was confirmation. I had known Justin was cheating. I just hadn't known with who. Discovering it was Maria, someone I'd welcomed into my home, trusted, fed. That cut deep. But instead of confronting either of them right away, I waited. I observed. I started collecting facts. Maybe I'd been listening to too many true crime podcasts, but I'd learned something from them. Patience is powerful. The next week, I got confirmation from my doctor. I was 10 weeks pregnant. I met with a lawyer to go over the lease, our shared assets, and what my rights were. Thankfully, we weren't married, so there was no divorce to wade through. I froze our joint credit cards, and opened a new checking account in my name. Basic protection, but important. I didn't tell anyone else about the pregnancy. Not yet. Not out of shame. Out of strategy. I needed to get my affairs in order first. 2 weeks after the birthday fiasco, Justin reached out again. He asked if we could talk, and if he could pick up more of his things. I agreed on my terms. We would meet in public, in the middle of the day, at a cafe not far from the apartment. He showed up looking rough, dark circles, rumpled clothes, that frantic energy of someone whose world had started unraveling. He jumped straight into this half-baked explanation about how he'd been unhappy, felt stuck, thought a clean break would be better for both of us. I let him ramble. Then I asked a simple question. Is Maria making you happy? The expression on his face, pure deer in the headlights. He stumbled through a weak denial, claiming it wasn't like that. I cut him off. I told him I'd seen the receipts. Literally. The hotel charges, the dinners, the jewelry. I told him I'd seen the messages, that I knew everything. He deflated like a balloon that had been pricked. He tried the classic, "It's not what you think," but I wasn't having it. I calmly told him that he could pick up the rest of his belongings on Saturday at 2 p.m. Aaron would be there to supervise. After that, if he needed to reach me, it would be through my lawyer. He froze when I said lawyer, repeating it like he'd just tasted something bitter. He protested that we didn't need to get legal. It wasn't that serious. I stood up. My heart was pounding, but I didn't let it show. I told him that after what he did at my birthday party, he'd made it very clear how serious it was. I was simply honoring the choice he had made. As I turned to leave, he reached out and grabbed my wrist. Not roughly, but with desperation. He asked how I planned to afford the apartment without him. pointing out that my salary barely covered half the rent. And that's when the final puzzle piece clicked into place. It wasn't closure he was after. It wasn't remorse. It was money. What Justin either didn't know, or conveniently forgot, was that for the past year I had been covering more than half the rent. His income had been slipping, but he kept up the illusion of success, leaning on my paycheck while acting like he was the main provider. To Maria, to our friends, probably even to himself, I smiled, cool and sweet, and told him not to worry. I'd be fine. Unlike some people, I actually saved money instead of blowing it on hotel rooms and gold-plated lies. His face went pale. I walked out of that cafe feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I'd won, because I could finally see Justin clearly. A man obsessed with appearances, clinging to a version of himself that didn't exist. A man who bailed the second things got inconvenient. Saturday came, and as planned, Aaron supervised, while Justin came to collect more of his stuff. I stayed out of sight, spending the day at a prenatal yoga class. Highly recommend it for stress relief, by the way. When I returned home, the apartment felt emptier, but also more mine. That evening, I rearranged the furniture. Over the next few weeks, I built a new rhythm: work, doctor's appointments, prenatal vitamins, budgeting. Not just surviving, preparing, reclaiming, building something better. As for Justin and Maria, their fairy tale wasn't going so smoothly. Word traveled through the grapevine. Okay, through Sergio, whose cousin worked at the restaurant, where they were often seen arguing in public. Apparently, Maria was discovering that Justin wasn't the man he'd presented himself as. Shocking, I know. The cracks began to show a month after our cafe meeting. I was grocery shopping, comparing prenatal vitamin brands, when my cart bumped into another. Maria. Her face went through a rapid cycle. Startled, guilty, then defensive. She greeted me with a tense smile, and told me I looked good. I told her she looked tired. She did. There was an awkward pause before she blurted out that Justin had told her we were already over when they started seeing each other. According to him, we were just roommates waiting for the lease to end. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. She tried to explain herself, maybe even apologize, saying she wouldn't have gotten involved if she'd known the truth. I told her it didn't matter now. She had him. I hoped it was everything she imagined. As I turned to leave, she called after me. He's not who I thought he was. He promised things he couldn't give. I glanced back, looked her dead in the eye. Sounds like a personal problem, and I walked away. About 6 weeks after the birthday disaster, I began to show just a tiny bump, but noticeable if you were looking. That's when I decided it was time to stop hiding. I began by telling my boss, who, bless her, was incredibly supportive. She offered flexible scheduling for later in the pregnancy and assured me I wouldn't need to worry about job security. Gradually, I told friends and close family. Word spread quickly. Social circles are like that. I knew it wouldn't take long for it to reach Justin, but I no longer felt the need to control that. This baby was real. It was happening, with or without his involvement. 7 weeks post-breakup, around my 17th week of pregnancy, the texts started. A string of them, one after another, all from Justin. Is it true? Are you pregnant? Why didn't you tell me? We need to talk. Immediately. Pick up your phone, Lily. This involves me too. I didn't respond, not out of spite. I honestly didn't know what to say. I needed space to figure out what, if anything, I wanted from him, if I even wanted him to be part of this child's life. Then came the final message. I have rights, you know. You can't keep my child from me. If you don't respond, I'm coming over. That one finally got a reply from me. I told him in no uncertain terms, not to come to my apartment uninvited, that if he showed up I'd call the police, and that I would contact him when I was ready to have a proper conversation. That quieted him for 2 days. Then, as you probably guessed from the title of the original post, he showed up. It was around 11 p.m. I was in bed, reading a pregnancy book and jotting down notes, when I heard a car door slam, then footsteps, then pounding on my front door, heavy, relentless pounding. And then Justin's voice, slurred, agitated. Lily, open the door. I know you're in there. We need to talk about our baby. For a moment, I froze. My heart was racing. Should I call the police? Call Aaron? Pretend I wasn't home? Then I heard something that made the choice clear. He was crying. Justin was outside my door, drunk, sobbing, and switching between yelling and pleading. He shouted that he'd made a mistake, begged me to talk to him, insisted he had a right to be part of our baby's life. And despite everything he'd done, every cruel word, every betrayal, some small stubborn part of me felt something. Not sympathy, but recognition. This wasn't the man who had strutted out of my birthday party like he was making a dramatic movie exit. This was someone who had crashed headfirst into the consequences of his actions. I got out of bed, slipped on a robe, and approached the door. I didn't open it. I spoke through it. "You're drunk. You need to leave. We'll talk tomorrow." Sober, in public. He insisted he needed to see me now, needed to know if it was true. Was I really pregnant? I confirmed it. 18 weeks along. And yes, it was his. But this wasn't the time, or the place, to talk about any of it. He had to go. There was a dull thud against the door. His forehead, maybe his hand. Then a low mumble, just barely audible. "Maria left me." He said she told him he wasn't who she thought he was, that he lied about everything. I couldn't help myself. I said it sounded familiar. He let out a hollow laugh, one of those laughs that's more pain than humor. Then he admitted he'd messed everything up, that he had nowhere else to go, that he wanted to make it right. I took a deep breath, one hand resting instinctively on my small belly. "I'll meet you tomorrow," I said. "The cafe on Main Street, 10 a.m. Be sober. Be on time. If you're not, there won't be another chance." He was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "Okay, tomorrow. I'll be there." I heard him walk away, his footsteps unsteady, then the sound of a car engine, not his, thankfully. At least he had the sense to call a ride. I climbed back into bed, and my phone lit up with one final message. "I'm sorry. For everything. The party. The note. Tonight. I'll fix it somehow." I didn't reply. Justin had always been good with words. But now, I needed action. Not for me. For this baby. Did I still love him? No. That died the night he humiliated me. Did I hate him? Not anymore. Hate requires energy, and I needed mine for something far more important. The next morning, I got to the cafe 5 minutes early, expecting him to flake. But there he was, at 9:55 a.m., looking like he hadn't slept. He'd already ordered a decaf latte for me, which might have been thoughtful, except I'd had to give up coffee entirely, because even decaf made me nauseous. A small detail, but somehow it said everything about Justin. Always guessing what I needed, never really listening. He launched straight into apologies, for the party, for cheating, for the lies, for showing up drunk. It felt like he was going through a checklist. I said nothing, just stirred my herbal tea and let him exhaust himself. There's something powerful about silence when someone expects a reaction. When he finally stopped talking, I asked the only question that mattered. "What exactly do you want?" He blinked like he hadn't expected me to be so direct. He mumbled something about wanting to be involved, to step up, maybe even try again. I actually laughed, not out of cruelty. It was just so absurd. I brought the conversation back to what mattered: co-parenting. I explained that I'd already spoken to a lawyer about child support and custody. When I said lawyer, his face twitched. He really hated that word. I laid it all out. I wasn't keeping him from his child, but he would have to rebuild trust. That meant showing up, being consistent, being financially responsible. No more disappearing acts, no more empty gestures. He tried to redirect the conversation again, toward us, toward our relationship. I shut it down. He called me cold, said I was being calculated. I looked him dead in the eye, and told him, "That birthday note? That was cold and calculated. I'm doing what I need to protect my child." That shut him up. Before I left, I handed him a folder. It included ultrasound images, my due date, contact info for my doctor, and a draft of the child support agreement. I told him to review it, get legal advice if he wanted, and let me know his response. As I stood to leave, he grabbed my wrist again. "Seriously, what is it with this man and wrists?" He asked if Maria knew about the baby. I told him it wasn't her business, and that I hadn't gone out of my way to tell her. Then I gently pulled my hand away and walked out. The following weeks were calm, a different kind of calm. I focused on setting up a makeshift nursery in my room, half of my bedroom, transformed into baby central. Barbara helped me put together a crib from IKEA, which took 3 hours and made us question everything we knew about furniture and friendship. I bought a changing table from a thrift store. My mom sent an adorable Star Mobile. Slowly the space began to look like a home for a baby. Money was tight, so I picked up freelance social media work on weekends. Nothing glamorous, but it paid a few bills. My mom also sent a bit of money, which was kind and awkward at the same time. I've always prided myself on independence. Justin was processing. He'd text occasionally to ask about the baby or the nursery setup. I'd respond with facts, never emotion. Sometimes he tried to reminisce about old times. I'd change the subject. Then came the incident. Yes, it deserves capital letters. I was at Target on a Saturday afternoon, stocking up on diapers. According to every parenting blog, you can never have too many. And whose cart do I bump into again? Maria. Only this time, the encounter was different. She didn't look defensive. She looked relieved. Like seeing me gave her some sort of closure. She asked how I was feeling, how far along I was. Her tone was genuine. Then she did something I never expected. She apologized. Not a hasty, awkward, "Sorry you feel that way," but a real apology. Thoughtful, sincere. She said she knew she had hurt me. She explained that Justin had painted a very different picture. That we were already broken up, just roommates waiting out a lease. She swore she wouldn't have gotten involved if she'd known the truth. Apparently she'd recently discovered that Justin had been seeing another woman behind her back. The irony was not lost on either of us. We ended up grabbing coffee, well, tea for me, and had the strangest, most surreal conversation. Two women who had been deceived by the same man, swapping war stories. Before we parted ways, she mentioned something I wasn't expecting. "By the way," she said, "Justin lost his job about 2 weeks ago. Figured you'd want to know. It might impact child support." I thanked her and walked home, brain spinning. I wasn't happy about his job loss. It complicated things, but at least now, I was informed. That night, as I folded baby onesies and listened to a podcast, my doorbell rang. Justin again. Sober this time, but visibly shaken. I checked the peephole, always check the peephole, and opened the door without inviting him in. He started talking right away, said he knew I probably heard about his job, that it wasn't his fault, that people were out to get him. Then he asked if I'd seen Maria recently. "Yeah," I said. His expression shifted, trying to appear casual. It didn't work. He asked what we talked about. "You," I replied. He didn't like that answer. Then he started spiraling, accusing me of turning people against him, saying no one was on his side, that he was doing his best. I told him he created this mess, and that playing the victim wasn't going to fly with me. That's when he broke. No dramatics, just this quiet collapse. He admitted his life was falling apart. No job, no girlfriend, barely affording rent, and a baby he wasn't ready for. And for a split second, I felt that old urge to fix everything. But then I remembered that note. "You're useless. I deserve better." I didn't comfort him. I gave him clarity. "You have two choices," I said. "Keep sinking, or start rebuilding. But this baby isn't going to wait for you to get it together." And for once he listened. When I finished he nodded. Then, surprising both of us, he asked if we could talk inside. I hesitated, then agreed. But I left the door open. Never close a door behind you with someone you can't fully trust. We sat at my kitchen table, a place that had once felt like home, but now felt more like neutral ground. Justin surprised me by asking real questions about the baby, not surface-level stuff. He wanted to know how the pregnancy was going, if there were any complications, what the birth plan looked like. It was the first time in months he wasn't trying to talk about himself or manipulate the narrative, and that's when it hit me. I didn't love him anymore, but I did want him to be okay. Not for him, for the baby. Before he left, he promised he'd review the child support proposal and start job hunting seriously. Then he did something unexpected. He thanked me for not completely cutting him off. For not hating him, even though I had every right to. I told him hate takes too much energy. I was saving mine for the baby. The following weeks brought a slow but noticeable shift. Justin found a new job. It didn't pay as well as his last one, but it was stable. He signed the child support agreement without a fuss, and even enrolled in a parenting class at the local community center. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect a total transformation, but I could tell he was at least trying. Meanwhile, I was focused on preparing for Zoe's arrival. Yes, I'd picked a name, Zoe. I rearranged my tiny apartment to accommodate her. Half my bedroom was now a nursery, the crib, a second-hand changing table, shelves filled with neatly folded onesies and burp cloths. Barbara and I had nearly torn our hair out putting together that IKEA crib, but we eventually figured it out, with only a few leftover screws that we just chose to ignore. Money was tight. I was working part-time doing social media content for a local business, thanks to a referral from Sergio. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something I could do while sitting on the couch with my swollen feet up. Every bit helped. Justin's texts became more appropriate, less emotional, more focused on parenting logistics. Occasionally, he'd slip and ask something personal, like if I was seeing anyone. I kept my replies neutral and brief. Then came another unexpected moment. I ran into Maria again, at Target. Apparently, this is where the universe likes to throw plot twists at me. This time, she didn't look nervous or defensive. She looked relieved to see me. She asked how I was doing and how far along I was. Then she did something I never expected. She offered a genuine apology. Not the half-hearted kind you say because you feel like you should, but a real one. She acknowledged that what she did was wrong, and that she'd been lied to just like I had. Apparently, Justin had told her the same story he told everyone, that we were just roommates, our relationship over in all but name. She said she wouldn't have gotten involved if she'd known the truth. But more than that, she told me that Justin had been cheating on her too. Turns out, the man who left me for her had already moved on to someone else while still with her. Classic. We ended up grabbing a drink, tea for me, and had a surprisingly honest conversation. We weren't friends, exactly, but there was a strange sort of camaraderie in being burned by the same fire. As we were saying goodbye, she casually mentioned that Justin had been let go from his job a couple of weeks earlier. She thought I should know it could affect child support. I thanked her for the heads up, then walked home, processing this new development. That evening, as I folded baby clothes and tried to quiet my overactive mind, my doorbell rang. I peeked through the peephole. Justin. This time, he was sober, but clearly shaken. He launched into an explanation the moment I opened the door, about the job loss, how it wasn't his fault, how he was being set up. Then he asked if I'd seen Maria recently. I didn't dance around it. I told him yes, and that we'd talked. His face twisted in this weird attempt at casual curiosity that didn't land. He asked what we talked about. You, I said. He didn't like that answer. He started pacing, worked up, said everyone was against him, that I was turning people on him, that he was trying to do better, and nobody was giving him a chance. I stopped him right there. You're in this situation because of your choices, I said. Not because everyone's out to get you. You built this mess. If you want out of it, start taking responsibility. And for the first time, he actually listened. He sat down, deflated. He said he felt like he was drowning, that everything was falling apart. No job, no partner, barely scraping by with rent, and a baby he didn't feel ready for. I understood the feeling of being overwhelmed. I lived in it daily, but I didn't pity him. I reminded him again that he had two options, drown or swim, and no one was going to rescue him this time. He nodded slowly and asked if he could come inside. I hesitated, then let him in, but kept the door wide open. We sat down again, and this time, the conversation shifted. He asked real, thoughtful questions, about delivery plans, about Zoe's health, about how he could help once she arrived. It didn't make me trust him, but it made me think maybe, just maybe, he was capable of change. Before he left, he promised he'd find another job. And this time, he said it without bravado, without trying to impress me. Just a quiet determination that seemed real. A week later, a package arrived. Inside was a simple lined notebook, and a note that read, "For your thoughts, plans, or all your true crime podcast ideas, you were never useless. I just couldn't see your worth." I didn't respond. Some things don't require acknowledgement. But I did start using the notebook, mostly to document the pregnancy journey, for Zoe. So one day, when she's old enough, she'll know the full story. Not to burden her, just so she knows where she came from. The final stretch of the pregnancy was both beautiful and exhausting. The kicks got stronger. My back hurt all the time. I cried over commercials, but every little discomfort made it more real. Justin continued stepping up in small ways. He came to doctor's appointments when I invited him. He helped build the stroller. He even watched online videos about how to swaddle a baby. We weren't friends. We weren't enemies. We were something new, co-parents navigating uncharted territory. Then just 6 weeks ago, Zoe arrived. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair, and Justin's chin, the only feature of his. I wasn't annoyed she inherited. Labor lasted 32 hours. 32 hours of pain, panic, and pushing. All those YouTube birth vlogs I'd watched did not prepare me for the real thing. Justin showed up at the hospital with a teddy bear, the size of a love seat. I have no idea where he thought I'd put that thing in my one-bedroom apartment. Barbara, as always, was my rock. She held my hand, fed me ice chips, talked me through contractions, and reminded me that I was already doing it, even when I sobbed that I couldn't. Justin mostly hovered awkwardly in the corner, scrolling his phone, and occasionally asking if I needed anything. But when Zoe finally arrived, and they placed her on my chest, something in me shifted. All the heartbreak, all the betrayal, all the grief, it had led to this. And for the first time in nearly a year, I felt peace. Justin cried when he held her. Not dramatic movie tears, awkward, blotchy, red-nosed crying that he tried and failed to hide. It was the most honest thing I'd seen from him in a long time. The first weeks at home were a blur of diapers, spit up, and exhaustion. My mom stayed with me for 2 weeks. She kept reorganizing my kitchen in ways that made zero sense to me, but made her feel helpful. Apparently, colanders belong with the strainers, not the pots. Who knew? Justin came by 3 times a week for scheduled visits. Sometimes he brought takeout, sometimes impractical baby clothes, like a tiny leather jacket for a newborn. But he showed up. We had our tense moments, missed visits, late arrivals, but overall, we managed. He even once brought cabbage leaves and a heating pad for a clogged milk duct situation. If you know, you know. Financially, things stabilized. Justin paid support on time, and I kept working part-time. My landlord agreed to renew the lease in just my name. A quiet victory. The apartment looked different now. Justin's things were long gone, replaced with baby gear that somehow took up twice the space. I repainted the living room, a soft sage green. It made me feel calm every time I looked at it. I'd run into Maria now and then. It wasn't awkward anymore, just one of those hey, hope you're well moments, with someone you once knew deeply, but now see clearly. The strangest development, Justin of all people, started seeing a therapist. The man who once said therapy was just paying someone to listen to you whine, was now recommending parenting books, and telling me about the dad group he joined on Facebook. And then there was Eli, the grocery delivery guy, who had shown up regularly during my postpartum fog. At first I barely noticed him. I was too sleep-deprived to notice anything. But then he started leaving little notes with the deliveries, tips from other parents, corny dad jokes. One day, when I was balancing a baby on one hip and trying not to cry over spilled formula, he offered to carry the water bottles inside. I hesitated, then let him. We started chatting. He was finishing a degree in environmental science and helping raise his niece and nephew. He didn't run away at the sight of a cluttered apartment or a screaming newborn. Eventually, we exchanged numbers for delivery issues, of course. Total excuse. He's come over for coffee a few times now. Nothing serious. I'm not rushing into anything. But he's kind, funny, easy to talk to. When Justin saw him leaving one day, he gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Nostalgia, jealousy, regret? He asked, casually, who that guy was. I just said a friend. Barbara thinks I should go for it with Eli. I'm not so sure. Zoe is my whole world right now, and dating as a single mom, that's a different ballgame. But I'm open, I'm healing, I'm rebuilding.
Barbara has been my rock through everything. When I'm overwhelmed and convinced I'm failing as a mom, she shows up with iced coffee, my first love finally back in my life now that breastfeeding has settled, and reminds me that every new parent feels like they're barely keeping it together. She takes Zoe for a few hours sometimes, just so I can nap, shower, or sit in silence and stare at a wall in peace. It's the kind of friendship you don't fully appreciate until you're clinging to it like a life raft in the middle of a storm. Yesterday was my birthday, 1 full year since the party that changed everything. Instead of mourning that memory, I had a small gathering. Barbara and her husband came, Aaron, Sergio, Lana, and a few other close friends. We kept it simple. Food, laughter, a few decorations Zoe kept trying to pull down. Justin stopped by briefly to drop off a gift. It was a bracelet, simple, elegant, with Zoe's birthstone set into a delicate charm. Thoughtful, unexpected. He didn't stay long, just gave a quiet nod and left. I didn't cry. I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Not because life is perfect, but because I've taken back control of it. As I looked around my apartment, filled with the people who truly cared,
with the scent of baby lotion and homemade cupcakes in the air, I felt something I never expected to feel on this day. Gratitude. For the chaos that pushed me to rebuild, for the truth that tore down illusions I didn't realize were suffocating me, for the daughter who gave my life new purpose. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Eli becomes something meaningful, or maybe he's just a kind chapter in this story. Maybe Justin continues to grow into the kind of father Zoe needs, or maybe he backslides. Maybe I stay in this tiny apartment forever, or maybe someday I find a little house with a backyard where Zoe can play barefoot in the grass. What I do know is this: I'm not the same woman who stood holding that cruel note 1 year ago. That woman was shattered, but determined. This woman is healed in the places that once felt broken, stronger, wiser, kinder to herself. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes, the worst thing that ever happens to you leads to the best version of yourself. Not immediately, not painlessly, but eventually. P.S. For those who've asked, yes, I kept the infamous breakup note. It's tucked into a small memory box in Zoe's closet, alongside her hospital bracelet, her first lock of hair, and the pregnancy test that started it all. One day when she's old enough, I'll tell her everything. Not to burden her, but because this story is hers too. Also, in case you're wondering, that absurdly oversized teddy bear Justin brought to the hospital, it now serves a very practical purpose, barricading the edge of the bed, so I can safely set Zoe down for 2 minutes, while I run to pee. So I guess, everything really does find its place eventually.